Where are you at, man?
I'm actually in Thailand right now.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I came over here for a little change of scenery from the snow in Canada, so it's been quite interesting. It's 7:30 in the morning here.
Whoa. All right.
Yeah, man. So
Well,
good morning. How about yourself? You're over in LA?
yeah. Yeah, I'm in LA. But that's cool.
Beautiful.
You're just on a little vacation?
Just kind of working remote, really. I was like, if I'm doing everything on the computer and able to connect with people such as yourself with the Wi-Fi, I figured, why stay tied down to one place? So I guess I'm trying to be like you. I'm hitting the road here and going on my own tour.
Right on. Good, man.
Yeah, man, I love it. So we see you here in your room with the gear. What model of guitar are we seeing in front of us right now?
Well, this is a Telecaster that I've had for a while, and I was just playing around with some. I was doing a little bit of writing and stuff today, and I hadn't played this guitar for ages, so I just plugged it in to see what I could get out of it.
How long do you typically keep a guitar and hang on to it once you buy it? I mean, is your collection a lot of stuff that you've owned for years, or is it sort of like a revolving door of, I'll get a guitar, get rid of a guitar?
No, I've had them for a long time. Um, they're all, I mean, I'm continually trying to, there's always a new one that I got my eye on and stuff. But the ones that that I've had for a long time, I've had since some of them since the early '80s. I've got a couple of guitars um, that I've had. Um, all this time, and just not even guitars that I would take on the road or whatever. Just I would use them for recording, or just I like them. This guitar I got, I guess I got this around '95, something like that. It's by a builder called John Cruz, master builder at Fender, and um, like I say, I was just and a lot of stuff I might have gotten from a company, so it's not stuff that I would generally move out. If anything, I would probably give it back to them.
Right. So some of the pieces you do get a bit of a sentimental value attached to them, depending on the story of how you got the guitar.
All of them I have a sentimental value to. I mean, there's everyone. They're like family members in a sense, because you've had them for so long. They're older than all my kids, so they are very special. And I got, you know, I had a buddy come over the other day, and he was like, "Oh, is that your main guitar?" I'm like, "No, no, no. They're all main guitars. It just depends on what mood I'm in. But generally, the Gibsons are my go-tos. They've been that way for the past 25 years, something like that.
Are there any specific traits, and I would imagine it varies quite a bit from, each brand and each guitar, but is there anything that you can look at just by one quick glance that you say this is going to be a pretty good guitar to play? Going to be the body of it or the strings?
I mean, you really need to get your hands on it. Are you talking about like if you see it
Yeah, if there's anything you
online or
can see
something?
before playing it, or do you really have to play it to get that feel for each piece?
You really, I mean, you can always see something that you think looks cool or it looks like it's got potential. And but there's been lots of times that I've bought guitars, and then I'd have to do a fret job or whatever. You never know until you get your hands on it. Um, and somebody thinks is set up the way that you like it might not be the way that you like it. So it takes a minute. Once I get a guitar that I'm comfortable with, whether I had to get it worked on or not, it little by little you get to know the instrument. They're all different, even if they look exactly the same. They're all little subtle differences, and so it's a matter of getting to know that guitar just like a person.
Now, obviously, you've been doing promo and press here for the upcoming blues record, Looking for Trouble, which is going to be awesome. Now, you guys talked about how this was recorded in the midst of recording the last record, correct? During the same sessions. Just curious about that. I mean, how much material do you guys typically record during an album cycle? Because, now we're seeing obviously the record that came out, but now we have another project coming from those same sessions. Is that typically the workload you guys take on?
No, this was a weird this was just a weird coincidence that it worked out that way. It was definitely we went there for a change of scenery to to write. Basically we were the intent was to go write a to work on the Light 'Em Up record, which came out last year, and and then somewhere along the line we started playing around with this blues stuff, and it just became really fun, something that we thought, hey, it would be good to have. And then, eventually it wasn't really for sure when it was going to become, if it was going to become an album project, but it just, it sounded cool. It's raw. It was just, recorded really quick. Like we didn't spend a lot of time trying to perfect anything so much. Um, of course, somebody like me, I would love to go. I said to the producer, I'd love to, try doing that song again or whatever. He was like, no, man, it's just for, basically, it's just a moment in time. We're just, documenting it. And then it turned into like, okay, we're going to put this out. It sounds good. It's got a vibe, So,
Wow. So it must be a really different feeling then compared to, methodically putting together each track and the way it's going to be produced for you guys. I mean, did it feel very different while you were making it or maybe just after the fact when you listened?
it just felt like it was um, live. We captured a moment when we were there. We were only down in that studio. It was in Fame Studios in Muscle Shoals, and we uh, we were there for I think a period of 7 or 8 days, something like that. And we had a bunch of ideas that we all presented to write for the other album, and then we started basically going through some of this stuff and coming up with our own arrangements on it. Maybe put our stamp on it as best we could. And it's cool. Like it's a group of songs that are they're all well known blues songs, and so it's pretty cool that we were able to kind of change them up a little bit and put our stamp on them.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, Crossroads is, a great example of that. Just you guys staying true to the original version, but also giving it your own twist.
Yeah.
Again, is that even a conscious thought in your head that you want to give it your own twist, or does that just naturally happen when you guys play it? Because you retain that Dead Daisies sound.
No, we wanted to just we didn't want to do it the same way as the original song. Um, actually Robert Johnson, I think, was one of the original players on that song. It was written. I forget exactly now who wrote Crossroads, but Robert Johnson was the first famous one, maybe, and then the Cream version is obviously really popular. And we talked about, let's try and do something different with it, So I think that song I ended up, because it um, felt like, we were doing blues. I whipped out a slide and started to kind of come up with a groove based off a slide part. And then it's basically a 1-4-5 chord progression. So you kind of just go through it, and you can sing the lyric just the same way as it was, written, but with a different kind of groove behind it, different guitar part. But so to answer your question more directly, we we didn't want to do them the same way. We tried to treat each one a little special.
Yeah, I think you can hear that in what's come out as well. Now, mentioning Eric Clapton, he just had his 80th birthday recently, and we've seen,
Yeah.
yourself and a lot of guitarists posting tributes to him. Maybe if you could speak a little bit on the influence of Clapton, because it feels to me that he was so much more than just a guitar player in the sense that he really weaved new genres and new paths for the instrument.
He definitely did. He changed his, he changed his thing a few times. What was he started off? He was in Cream. He was in Blind Faith, and then he went solo. A few other things, but basic. Um, Bonnie and Brent. I forget what the other band was, um, but he basically, when I heard of him, it was in the '70s. He was doing his own thing. It was, the solo stuff, and Slow Hand was was out. Um, Layla had been out. Derek and the Dominoes. Layla
Yes.
had been out on the radio, and I would say, like, I just loved his songs, and I loved his voice. His guitar playing was amazing. I probably wouldn't say that he was one of. I wouldn't say that when people hear me play, they hear a lot of Eric Clapton, but there's a little bit probably in there. I think, you know when I think of Eric Clapton, I just think of great songs, great melodies, and I really love his voice. Is one of the biggest things.
Who would you say is the most influential guitar player, for you personally? Because I think there's conversation about the general influence for everybody, but I would imagine you have, one or two people who really, you looked to at least in the beginning to cultivate a sound.
I mean, I basically loved I loved everybody for different little bits of what they did, what their playing brought. It started, you know, I started in the '70s playing guitar, so there was stuff like Jimi Hendrix was on the radio, Zeppelin was on the radio, and then there was a lot of stuff. Um, there was a lot of, the Allman Brothers was on the radio, so all that stuff was important to me because I hear it. I didn't have a record player, but my sister had both sisters had record players, and my older sister had a Jeff Beck record called "Blow by Blow," which is a famous one of his, and that's when I really was like, wow, the guitar is insane on that record. It's just it really you don't even you don't need any vocals. It was just beautiful melodies, and the guitar was so in your face. It was awesome. And then little by little, through friends, whatever, discovered everybody. Obviously Jimmy Page, Hendrix, Blackmore. Those guys were on the radio, and they were, amazing guitar players. But later, guys like Michael Schenker, and obviously when Eddie Van Halen came out, Randy Rhoads was definitely inspirational. But Gary Moore, I would say, my style probably I really related to Gary Moore a lot, and he's one of my biggest, I would think.
Now, jumping back to the Dead Daisies for a moment, obviously a group with a bunch of incredibly seasoned musicians and people who have been veterans in the music business for quite some time. How do you guys go about the decision making process and, somebody making the final call in the band? I mean, is that a very communal thing? And, whose band really is the Dead Daisies? This was actually a question from a fan.
Oh, really? It's The band was founded by David Lowy, and he started it off with a singer called John Stevens. Eventually, Richard Fortis and Marco Mendoza and Dizzy Reed and Brian Tishy and John Corabi. That was the lineup that I first heard. And I was basically off the road. They asked me to do an album, and I joined. And we've now have been in the band coming up on 10 years, maybe something like that. But the band was David Lowey's band. I mean, he put it together, he founded it, but he definitely likes to have this communal vibe where everybody's able to put in ideas. Everybody's you know, basically comes up together with trying to see what would be the way to do something. You know, it's not like it's generally not one guy, but we do have, you know, the guys in the band. We have a really strong management team that a lot of times they'll say, "Hey, why don't we, you know, why don't we think about doing something like this? Why don't you guys see what you can come up with?" And so it's like, you know, the band does it together. Old fashioned, we do it live together. We write everything together. We record live. You know, fortunately, we're in a situation where, you know, we can do stuff like that because um, it really a record like this, Looking for Trouble, maybe wouldn't happen. It wouldn't happen if we didn't go to Alabama. You know, that just for that week. Um,
Right.
so but to, you know, back to your question, everybody's, you know, ideas are valid, and we just will run with something and see where it goes, and everybody tries to make it the best it can be.
Now, how about the lineup? Obviously, there's been a number of lineup changes in the Dead Daisies. Is that something that is by design that, you know, kind of keeps things fresh in the band, or is it just simply a matter of circumstances?
It's a matter of circumstances, really, and that's okay. That's kind of the way it was presented to everybody. Was, you know, you can input, your input is is going to be really cool if you get an offer to do something you'd rather do, or if something comes up that you know, you want to go off and do something else. That's totally cool too. So, like I said, the main guy that I when I first heard about the band, the main guy that I my vision of the Dead Daisies was always with Karabi, you know, and so when I joined the band, we started kind of getting on a really amazing role of making a bunch of records and touring. Like it was full on, a lot of, you know, a lot of time spent on the road and recording and whatnot. And I think, you know, it got to the point where John basically, he had some other stuff that he wanted to do for, you know, he wanted to put out a Motley Crue um, record that was he recorded it live in Nashville, basically featuring the songs that he had done with Motley Crue, and and wanted to do his own thing for a little bit. So he took off. Um, at that point, Glenn Hughes came in, and that was like, it was cool because it wasn't trying to replace John per se. It was really trying to, you know, see what we could bring with a new singer, you know, with Glenn. And eventually Glenn decided he wanted to, you know, we did a couple albums with Glenn. Um, and then he wanted to get back to doing his thing. At the same time, it had been an anniversary of the band, and we wanted to put out a best of. And so we got John to come back. So it really depends. You know, it's open. The lineup that we have right now is really strong. They're all really strong for different reasons, and it just depends on, you know, um, scheduling and stuff like that. But we've got, you know, as you know, we've got me and Michael Devin from Whitesnake, and John, David, obviously, and Tony Clafetis from Rob Zombie and Ozzy and Sabbath, stuff like that.
Yeah, incredible powerhouse lineup. Just real quick, obviously Ronnie James Dio is a you know pretty big part of your past and your story here in the rock business. I don't
Yeah.
really like when people phrase the question in the way of, you know, what's your favorite moment or anything like that. But when I say Ronnie James Dio, what are the first things that really come to mind for you? It could be just little small moments or, you know, random anecdotes.
Well, he is just, I mean, he was just very inspiring. He really, that's a really good question, bro. It's hard to lock it down into like one thought, but in in a short amount of time, when you would spend it with Ron, you would be inspired to be a better. He definitely made everybody better around him, and he inspired. He demanded actually that you know, put your best foot forward, and he wanted to, it's like this is one of those guys that I discovered by chance, when I was younger, and then playing in a band with him, it was like, how lucky is that? Um, um, but he loved he was very simple. He loved what he did, and he did it 24/7. The only other thing that he basically would do is he loved sports. He would listen to. I I can just see him right now in his house, in his kitchen. He might be having a Guinness or something, and he'd have a little transistor radio on his kitchen table, and you'd go over there in the morning. He'd be listening to sports radio, and it was weird. He was just like really into that. And he was also really into crossword puzzles. Like when I was recording with him, he was in the studio with me all the time. Like every day, we'd all go to the studio together. And if I was doing guitars, it was that. But he'd be sitting there with a crossword puzzle on the side of the console, and that was his place where he would just kind of, you know, you'd ask him, "Hey, what do you think?" He would go, "Oh, let's hear it." He'd get his head out of the crosswords and basically want to, listen to something, and hopefully, he was happy with it. Which with me, I was really lucky. He liked what I was bringing. So, um, but he just he was so awesome to watch on stage. I became definitely inspired by how he would own the stage, so much. So yeah, it was. I could say, the first thing that comes to mind with Ronnie is, beer or something, because the first time I met him, we went to a pub. Then the second time I met him about 10 years later was when I actually joined. Um, we met at a pub, and it was like over a beer. So it's just something as simple as that, but he was amazing, and he's greatly missed.
Yeah, I understand he was incredibly humble too. Like he would go into the booth and lay down one of the greatest metal vocals of all time and walk out and just kind of be like, ah, I think that was okay.
Yeah. Yeah. He never, I mean, he was confident. He was definitely confident, but he was, how most people, you get a little butterflies when the recording light comes on, and it makes you really want to, you're on the edge, on the knife edge. But Ronnie, man, he lit up in that situation. It reminds me of, what it must have been like to be around Stevie Ray Vaughan. Like the recording light comes on, or you're on stage, and it's just like locked in 100%. And that's how Ronnie was. When he'd come, he would generally want to record his vocals in a situation where there wasn't people hanging out distracting him. But he was always, anytime I was around him when he was singing, he was always really, like you said, very humble, and he was confident. He wouldn't he might say, let me do that again. I want to. Maybe he might have said, let me redo that bit right there or something. But everything that he did was really good. So he was just at that point trying to please himself, make sure it was the way he wanted it to be.
Now we've heard in that time period about there being friction between Ozzy and Dio. Is that something that you guys felt as a band that there was friction with yourselves and Ozzy's solo group?
Not not really. I mean, we didn't really talk about. I'm trying to remember if we ever talked about Ozzy, but that I don't really remember. I mean, I didn't really get into any of that stuff. Of course, I love Ozzy. Um, with regard to the Sabbath albums, I listened to the Sabbath albums when I was a kid and loved that stuff. But when that album came out with Ronnie, with Heaven and Hell, when it came out, it was it was massive. It was like, wow, this is something. I wondered what it was going to be like, and then we didn't hear anything about Ozzy for a year or so, and then Ozzy came out with Blizzard of Oz, and it was like, it's like a win-win, you know. Um, at that time, Sabbath, I mean, this was what, 10 years in or something. I don't even know, 10 years in that they made the change to Ronnie. And so they were still kind of relatively young, and and that was a really strong record, as was Mob Rules. But Ozzy was doing his own thing. I know that they had some some rubs or whatever. Probably, I remember prior to me working with Ronnie, there was some stuff, but I didn't really think about that at all.
Yeah, more so focused on the joy of the music, which we love. And speaking of that, Looking for Trouble is on the way from the Dead Daisies. We want to encourage everybody to go and check it out. We're gonna have the links down below. And Doug, I
Cool.
really appreciate your time, man. What are you most excited for people to take away from the new project?
Basically, just here what we our spin on some of these classics. I mean, like for example, it's very raw, but I'm kind of like the last one to ask, like, what do you think? How do you think you played on something? Because I'm never really happy with. I could redo something 25 times and still be like, I'm not sure if I really hit it the right way. Like I don't know if you can relate in what you do,
Yeah,
but sometimes sometimes it happens where you get lucky and you get a take early on that you're like, that's it, that's the one. Sometimes the melody's in your head and you're like, I could start it like this, but I want to get to this other melody, and then I'm not sure what to do, but I'll figure that out later. And eventually, you get it dialed in just how you really wanted it to, but it takes a minute. With Looking for Trouble, it was all, we would kind of work up our version of the groove and the arrangement, and then we would basically just kind of go in the room live and jam it out. Once we had a basic arrangement, we would record it and kind of move on. And I thought, and some of the stuff I was able to go back and touch up or whatever, but there was a couple that, like The Thrill Is Gone. We worked on that at the end of the day one day, and I wasn't really. We worked up a different kind of groove for it in more of a 6/8 feel, and I basically knew the basic chords are pretty simple, and the melody is pretty cool. Not pretty cool. The melody is amazing the way that
yeah,
BB played it, um, and so I was like, okay, cool. We got a different groove, so that makes it fresh. And I had never played it really, the complete song before, so we went through it, and it was like, good, you guys, that sounds great. Let's listen to it. Listen to it tonight. Listen to it tomorrow morning, and we'll hit it tomorrow sometime when we got time to hit it fresh. And I listened to it that night, and I listened to it in the morning, and I was kind of like, I don't think I can. I went to the producer Marty Fredrickson, and I said, Marty, I don't know if I can really. I mean, I played a lot. I was locked in, and I played a lot of things I've never even thought of before. Like I've never played that way
mm,
before. I don't know if I can better it. It was like,
wow,
he, it was. He's like, it's fine, man. It could be a first take if you're happy with it. I go, well, I know that that probably I would hear things that I want to do differently down the road, but right now there's so many little nuances that there's like I could never remember it. There's no way I could even learn it. It just was. I was playing. I was playing from the feeling. Playing from the heart, as cliche as that sounds, and
yeah.
and that ended up being the take that's on the record. It's just like I got lucky. I could, and I was lucky because I was afraid he was going to go, no, 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 we got to redo it. And he was like, no, it's cool, man. We'll leave it. If you're, I think he goes, I think it sounds great. If you're happy with it, let's just move on. So it's really, the record has got a lot of great songs. We put our stamp on everything. We really went to town on Black Betty. Um,
Mm,
that song is known by the Ram Jam version, which is a great version, and a lot of people covered it the way that Ram Jam did it. But the original way was by a guy called Leadbelly, um, and it was just a working melody for like basically kind of during that period in the 50s, I guess. It was like one of those work songs that you would
Right.
sing when you're busy working, and so we kind of approach that from that perspective, and then just put music to it in that way, and it's got a little bit of like it's got a little bit of a Texas thing to it, ZZ Top style or something, but I
Right.
think people will really enjoy that. So there's just a lot of different treatments on it. So that's what I hope people will check out. And like you say, there's a couple songs already. I'm Ready is um, I'm Ready is one that's out. Crossroads is out, and I think Boom Boom is coming out soon. But the record comes out end of May, so hopefully people will get a chance to check it out. And if you like blues and obviously rock together, that's you're gonna dig it, hopefully.
Absolutely, man. It's so much fun. And Doug, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate you checking in with me.
Of course, Cassius, thank you, man, and have a great time on your trip, and be safe out there.
Thanks,
Um,
man.
and look forward to seeing you. Hopefully, we get to come back to Canada soon. That would be
Yeah,
awesome.
that'd be great. I'll be in Toronto, sooner than later, so I'll keep an eye out for you guys.